I guess this is a slight teaser. It's not going to give you anything, and it'll make sense in a couple months. We have an in development character where we were working on a mechanic that stacks as you kill people.
Okay.
And we had a version of that where you need to like kill or eliminate a total of like 6 people, right?
Okay.
And then we're like, oh man, this is great. This is really compelling. Wait a second. It doesn't work in Demolition.
No, yeah.
You can't kill 6 people in one round. Like, it
happening.
just doesn't really work. So we had to reevaluate, take another look at it. And I'm excited to see what happens when that character comes out at some point. We'll see. It'll be interesting.
I don't know. That sounds like a duelist to me, kind of ability there potentially. Right then, guys, welcome to a very special video. I am here joined with Kret and Pretty Hair, two designers and developers of Rogue Company, and I'm going to do a little bit of an interview asking some questions that I've been burning to ask since ever I got started with Rogue Company. So, guys, welcome very much to this little interview that you guys wanted to set up. How are you? How are your days? If you want to, could you introduce yourselves just a little bit?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having us. My name's Pretty Hair. Some of you guys might recognize me if you've played other high-res games. I used to be a commentator and just recently started doing design with the wonderful team over here at Rogue Company. And I specifically mostly focus on gameplay and the rogues therein.
Cool, and I'm Kret. Similar to Pretty Hair, I was once a commentator. That was like 6 years ago, so we're sort of on the same path. I've just been in the design phase for longer, and he spent more time in commentary. I've been on Rogue Company for a long time, about 3 years now, and it's been a blast the whole way. We've made some cool stuff, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, Rogue Company's come a long way since I started playing in closed beta, and obviously you guys have been working on it since way before then. And one of the things I've always wanted, this has been a question that from a player point of view, I've always been really, really interested in, is character design, like how the stages of that design really work. What comes first? Do you look at the ability? Do you have an idea of an ability and are just like, we need to turn this ability into a character? Or do you have the idea of a character? And I know, Pretty Hair, you worked on Canon recently, who is the newest rogue due to come out October 5th, from what I saw today on Twitter. So let's kind of talk about how does that design process work?
For sure. It's a little bit of what do you have the strongest kind of stake in. I think for Canon was definitely like we wanted to do a Gatling gun or minigun, whatever you want to call it. So he kind of started rooted, I think, a little bit more in an ability. And I think that's something that we have put our foot down a little bit on and say that is the route we want to walk a little bit more often when we can. We want to think about what are some really fun archetypes or ability things that we don't have yet that we definitely do want to have. And we will start there and kind of build around it. But it hasn't always been that way necessarily, Kret.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sort of depends on where you're at in the development cycle. Very early on, we knew we needed characters in the game, right? Like we knew it was going to be third person. You're going to look at something. So some of the earlier character designs were a little bit more of like, let's get the basics in there. Hey, let's make Dima. He's a character that makes stuff blow up. Let's get Dallas, and we came up with a Snap, which was in the game for a very long time. And those characters just sort of came together from existing pieces or sort of naturally evolved. But they didn't start necessarily with as strong of an initial vision. Whereas for a character like Canon, right off the get-go, we're like, okay, this character, I think what I said, Nick, was he trades mobility for firepower. That was the guiding thing. Now, we brought that to light in terms of a minigun, but part of it is also saying, okay, like what's the fundamental thing that we care about? And doing so in a way that leaves room for interpretation. So the individual designer that's working on the character can take that and run with it in whatever direction they want to choose, as long as it's in the roughly same channel that everyone has agreed to and is thinking about. And as Nick mentioned, often the ability is the first thing that we come up with. So we'll basically have meetings where we're like, okay, what sorts of things do we need to put in the game? Do we need like a character that foreshadowing a little bit, right? Do we need a character that's a support that doesn't revive people, right? That's something that we want. And so we say, okay, we're going to do that character and we're going to start thinking about it in March. and the character is going to come out a couple of months later. But that's sort of the planning process, is at the very basics, like what is the thing that we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, no, I like that. I like that you sort of that grounding. And then you sort of said here, and I guess I didn't really think of this. Do you have one designer, one developer that leads a character specifically? Like, is there like a head of that character, and they sort of take that forward with their own vision, and other people jump into?
Yeah. So that's me for canon, where I'm technically responsible for all of the little finer details of the kit, of how much damage, how fast will it fire, how long will you have it, what's the passive, how does that work? All of like those little micro questions come from that sort of on point designer. But we are very collaborative and talk a lot with each other about what expectations are, like James said, making sure that designer isn't straying like really far off the path. If there's like maybe a lesson that I or Kret learned from a different character, and we see somebody maybe starting to walk down that path of maybe making a similar mistake, we try to divert that stuff, and it's not really giving a hard call. It's just like some feedback. Hey man, in the past I've learned this. You're kind of welcome to sort of do what you want, but it's something that we want to keep in mind. Rarely will we like kind of draw a line in the sand and say we're not going to give this character 350 health, right? That's just something we're not willing to do. Can't do that. So there are certain like constraints within the box, but generally speaking, you kind of have that freedom to roam around within.
Okay, that's interesting. Go on.
Yeah, so ultimately, and that's one of the great things about Gandhi is that he really believes in ownership for designers, right? And so that's really what we try to do, is we try to say, like, this is your character, it's your vision, it's your drive, what you want to do with it is what we're going to do, as long as that fits in within the general direction that everybody agrees with and is bought into, right? Because we also want to make sure that we're making characters that our animators and our character artists and our VFX guys and the whole team is excited about making.
Yeah.
Because if we can't get ourselves excited about it, then how are we going to get the players excited about it?
No, that makes a lot of sense. You kind of need everyone to be passionate and have the same sort of idea when you go into it, especially when you get like the visuals in, because what you might have in your head for canon, for example, might not be what a visual artist has, and so you got to kind of work that out. But one question I did have, because I'm a big lore guy, I love lore, I love connecting to characters on that deeper level. Where does like personality and lore come in the design stage? Like you've got canon, you've got your Gatling gun, you know what you want to do with it, you've designed the damage and the numbers. When do you add the chef and he wanted to be a helicopter gunner but then couldn't? Like, where does all that come into the sort of story part of
yeah, we have a narrative team that works together on that. There's a couple of folks that do a good job of kind of coming up with something. And for canon specifically, I believe it was an African American studies professor from, I want to say, Emory University, which is a university here in Georgia where we're located, to kind of help give him some flavor and making sure that we were hitting all the right notes and making canon the best that he could be.
That's really interesting.
And so I sort of mentioned a while ago, like, we come up with sort of the basic idea for the character. That's also where we come up with the basic personality. And similar to the actual gameplay design, we go from there, right? So for canon, we're like, okay, he's happy to be here. Like, he's just sort of in a good mood. He's a happy dude. He's loving it. And the narrative team then says, okay, what does that tell us about the rest of the character? Where do we go from there? That's their jumping off point. So sort of, we call them like high level meetings, and that's really the idea, is like, what are the high level guide stones for the character that everybody can agree on and also understand in the same sort of way, so that everything makes sense to the whole team that's working on the character.
And kind of similar to what Kret said earlier about, when we think about abilities, like what types of stuff do we need in the game? That goes for character like personality too. Like we do a good job of like edgy and serious and precise and the contract killer, but it's like we need like a fun person in the cast that's just cracking jokes, upbeat, very bubbly, just kind of fun, good energy to have. And we think that canon does a good job at serving that up.
I like that. I like the balance. Yeah, you have a lot of sassy characters in Rogue between Dahlia and Runway. I think it's funny. It's just the voice quips. Just sometimes they're good little chimes. Even like the helpful ones sometimes have a little bit of just sass undertone. Like, yeah, you're welcome for me getting you up. Like, okay, I love that. I love the whole lore aspect. I think that really adds to a game, and I think you guys have done a good job, especially now with the bios coming out, to flesh that out and give players something to like connect to on that wider level, which other games don't.
Yeah, shout out to the narrative team. I mean,
Yeah.
they do a good job fleshing that stuff out, and they deserve all the credit for that.
All right, so going on from that then is kind of another topic I want to talk about is how do you take a character like Runway, who was in the start cinematic of Rogue Company, how do you take the vision that you have from that character and the player expectation and bring that into Rogue Company? Like, what is that process like of doing that justice?
Well, it's hard, but it's hard in different ways from normal characters, right? Like with canon, it's we don't know what we're making when we set out. The first thing we know is nothing, right? And we say, all right, we need like something like a minigun or some sort of heavy weapons. We want a character that brings levity to the game, and we're starting from scratch. With Runway, we already know who she is. She's already sassy. She's already British. She already sells guns, and so we're like, all right, she's kind of got to do those things, which is good because you know what you're making. But it's difficult because then you know what you're making, and yet you kind of have to figure out a way to make it work. So for Runway specifically, the challenge was we want to make a support character that doesn't just revive people. We've got Dahlia, we've got Saint. I'm sure if we look 5 years in the future, Rogue Company will have another character that does that thing in a new and exciting way. So that's a slam dunk. We can do another 2, 3, however many of those revive characters. But that shouldn't just be all the support role is, because support players are sort of like they're a universal population. They're in every game, and they just want to help everybody out and be useful in ways other than pure combat. So we said, okay, we've got an arms dealer. Our game has a shop. We have a variety of weapons. We have gadgets. There's got to be something here. And we dove into it from that angle, and we tested a bunch of stuff in that area. And it was really tricky to find the right thing and find a good point of balance for it. We tried versions where she refreshes abilities, and that turned out to just be really busted. And you'd sort of like, what's the most OP combo? Okay, that's the only thing you'd ever do. And she's bad if she doesn't have that combo, and she can't actually use the ability without another character there. We tried some stuff that messed with the shop, but it was invasive in like a weird, not necessarily satisfying way. It ended up being her passive, which ultimately was, we think, pretty cool, and is also a cool experience for Dahlia.
Yes.
But the briefcase ended up being like a good way to take something that's already in the game and amplify it a little bit. It was tough to find the right tuning because it does need to be in some way as good as reviving a teammate. But obviously the amount of gadgets you have in one match or one round of demolition is a very tricky variable. So it took a little bit of balancing to get that number to be right. But we do think that she still feels strong, even though the amount of gadgets we've reduced since our initial testing phases. And also the infinite ammo thing is like pretty underrated. There are definitely times where I'm very happy to have that.
Economically as well, I think getting those cash incentives for your teammates and yourself interacting and using it frequently, and remembering to do that. You look at some of these Runway's net worths who are really significantly ahead of their team, and I think that's another cool thing, because she does have she's got to get through all the weapon upgrades. They're very worth it for her to buy in certain aspects of her shop. Very cool character, and I think it came together in a nice way.
No, I would agree, and kind of what you said there about a support role that doesn't necessarily focus on reviving, I like, because you've got an ability there with the briefcase that allows your team to get an additional kill potentially, or additional piece of utility that could lead to a play being made, and that in itself is kind of as good as a revive, because you can trade that kill, or you can reposition with a smoke grenade, or whatever it is you decide, or 100 trip mines, whatever we're feeling on the day. They'll be there somewhere to help us. So I like what you did there specifically with that.
It's an interesting challenge to look at that. That's like the first, and who knows for how long, right? Like, she's a character that was sort of like in the background of like that cinematic to Ronan and Dima. Like, none of the other characters really come in with like that expectation or that excitement. They're just kind of coming out of the blackness, and we hope they like him. Cannon jumps out of a helicopter and it's like, here he is, this is what he looks like. Whereas Runway kind of had that like build up, which I think is cool to see. in the Rogue Company. It's cool to see people getting excited about the things in the background, and that's because people showed that excitement in this character in the background of a cinematic. The narrative team is like they're gonna start dropping you guys little breadcrumbs and little things to look for. So definitely keep your eyes peeled and let us know that you're enjoying these types of things, right? That's how we sort of guide our action. What do you guys like? What is resonating with you? That's what we want to bring to you.
Yeah, and there's actually another interesting point here is it was very difficult to determine when we wanted to do Runway.
Yes.
Because let's imagine we waited another year. That's the point where maybe you start forgetting about the character from the cinematic because it's been so long, right? At the same time, the first 20 or so characters of game are very important because you want to fill out your roster with a bunch of different options. For example, we knew we wanted Switchblade because we wanted a second character that has a relatively straightforward explosive for an ability, right? And so we had to say, okay, how does that, is that more or less important than Runway? We knew we wanted Mac because we wanted to introduce narratively a third party to the universe, and that was actually one of the driving factors behind that character. Less of a gameplay thing and more of let's add a third party into this narrative and get things really going. I think we ended up finding a really good spot for Runway where she can come in, you get that recognition. It wasn't too long ago, so you still remember who she was. But she also comes in at like I think a really natural time for that third support character, and maybe for someone that I think her specific like what she brings to gameplay isn't necessarily on like the checklist of things that you really need, right? Like you need the support characters, you need the explosives, you need the defenders, and it's like okay, like it's cool, it's great, but it's not like on that easy layup of like the 10 characters you need in your game.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm making a video of like you need this roster, Runway doesn't necessarily always fit into that, but she's one of those like because I find with Rogue Company as the meta shifts throughout the game, there's always a flex role. There's always like one character that could be kind of anything. Whether you put out the Lancer for a nice little flank, or you could now put in a Runway for that just additional team beefiness in terms of the utility. So I like the direction that she came in there with. I think she actually was done really well for such a unique character. And one thing I actually also wanted to mention with her specifically is she is our first kind of hybrid role in the support/sniper category. So how does that decision making come about? Almost like what led to that being the passive and the weapon choice of that as well, kind of being something you guys went with?
Yeah, so part of that is that the sniper role is pretty unique. Pretty much every other role is defined by primarily their ability passive, secondarily their gadgets. Snipers really are just defined by the fact that they have a sniper rifle. And so ultimately we're taking a critical look at that sniper role and seeing where we think it fits into the game. And also, you mentioned before, like, the depth of like this fourth character on the roster and the flex pick, and maybe Runway can go there. That depth is really compelling for us, and that's something that we want to dig deeper. So maybe you're not just thinking about the fourth character on the roster. Maybe you're thinking about the whole roster from the ground up. And I think taking a good hard look at our roles is something that's going to be very important to how we leverage that. Especially because I actually think we do have other hybrids. They're maybe just not as obvious. I'd say Glitch is a very strong intel character and a breacher, right? But he doesn't explicitly carry the defining factor of another role, such as Runway being a support carrying a sniper rifle. So it's just sort of different, some specific weirdness with the sniper role. But also hybrids are cool and we want more of them. That's an interesting way to make a character and to fill out your team comp with somebody that can do multiple things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think also you could put Chark in that sort of list as well, of this sort of breacher technically, but he does have great duelist potential. I mean, if you need someone to 2v1, you're putting out Mr. Bang in your chest and run at you guy, and he's got so much kit to help with that as well. So I like that. I guess there are kind of other hybrids in the game. And Runway just kind of, at least for me, highlighted that potentially. That we do have some people who are kind kind of different. And the damage numbers that you worked with her kit specifically, I love, because the Hydra does 30 body damage and the Sniper does obviously 70 body damage. So if you're not like that clean 140 headshot, you've got that kind of nice little 2-tap potential there, which I personally really like. I like little things like that. And with weapon mastery coming in as well, so many more options to mess with that. So yeah, Runway is definitely a character that I think had a lot of expectation necessarily and was lived up to in a interesting way, because she is this weird kind of support that has a lot of other capabilities as well. So I like that. And you kind of mentioned there, as you were going through it, that you were talking about roles and things. What, in your guys' opinion, is the hardest role to design for out of the ones that we have currently within Rogue Company? Because when you're making these rogues, and we've kind of got a formula, at least in the content creator mind, of like what the next rogue is going to be based on what rogues we already have. Like we know we just had a support, we've now got a defender on the way with cannon. What we're expecting now is going to be another duelist, maybe another breacher. We just had switchblade though, so and we kind of technically have a sniper now as well. So duelist in my head might be coming next. What
leading question here?
Leading question.
Very, very clever.
I'm not asking you to say anything. I'm just putting a prediction out there.
No, yeah, I think it's a good question. I've never personally done the support, but I would think that would probably be the one, at least for me, that I would not struggle with, but it would probably be the most complicated to do, because it is like, managing that expectation of, am I just picking somebody up faster or in a different way, or how am I supporting that team? Whereas like, I don't know, duelists just kill them good. Breacher, roll out the red carpet, clear stuff out in a good way. Defender can be a little tricky, right? Especially if you look at someone like Cannon, who is like, his defense comes through really powerful offense and just being kind of slow. But having done one breacher and 2 defenders, I think support is probably the one that I would kind of take the hardest look at least for me personally.
Yeah, support can definitely be tricky. One of the other big factors is, to what extent is the ability selfless or selfish as a support? Saint literally cannot do anything by himself. He needs to help somebody else, or his ability doesn't exist. Dahlia, because of her passive, you are going to get some benefit, but ultimately her ability, once again, only works if you're reviving somebody else, and it's only one specific person. Runway does have some selfishness to her ability, and there are actually times in development where I believe she could interact with her briefcase multiple times. So that was actually too selfish, and you get mad at other people for taking your grenades. So we iterated away from that for that reason. Support can be tricky, but I personally think it's snipers. Snipers and intel that are the hardest, because so much of the identity of the role of a sniper is in their gun, which means that the role doesn't really tell you a lot about the rest of the character, right? So for a defender, you sort of know what the ability should be doing.
Yeah.
As a sniper, it's like, okay, they've got a sniper rifle and their ability should help them snipe in some way. So that can be tricky. And then intel is tricky just because there's only so many ways to do it. So that's like the big challenge going into an intel character, of like, okay, Dallas just is the instant reveal. You've got, I guess we'll count Glitch with his tablet reveal.
Yeah.
You've got Talon with the radar dart reveal. You've got Seeker with the bouncing area reveal. Like, just figuring out new ways to package those core mechanics is always an interesting challenge. And making sure it's tough to find like the balance of where an intel character sits within their own role.
Yeah, I kind of like what you said about snipers there as well, because if I look at the 2.5 snipers that we have currently, we have Phantom, whose entire kit kind of helps her with intel in a way. I know that she's been using that intel playstyle before. So she kind of has this intel-based sniper role. Fixer has this sort of positional, take advantage, take a zone, like push forward, use that smoke to your advantage sort of way of sniping. So when you add other snipers in, you kind of go, it's kind of hard to think like exactly what is going to help them snipe specifically to fit them into that sniper role. And I guess another thing that kind of comes with that is, you got to add more snipers as you have more
Yeah.
sniper characters. Is like if the most defining thing about a sniper character is the sniper itself, then adding new snipers maybe is the easiest way or the freshest way of adding some difference to that character. So like I think the gun aspect of a sniper is particularly difficult. Would you guys agree with that? Like
That is a pretty tough thing because you talk about expectation. When you
Mhm.
read the word sniper, you're like pretty clear on what you're
Mhm.
expecting that thing to do. If it's not one tapping somebody in the head, I think you're immediately going to be like, what the heck is it? You know,
Yeah.
like I expect this to hit really
Mhm.
hard, have good range, all that types of things. And I
Mhm.
think we did a pretty good job with the tier. It kind of had
Yeah.
an identity crisis for a little bit
It
there.
did.
But I think it's a cool idea, and I think it's
Mhm.
executed pretty well on it as well.
Yeah, we have internally tested the one-shot body sniper
I was gonna
rifles,
ask, yeah.
and we have come to the conclusion that they are just fundamentally busted in our game.
Yeah.
Like with just the way Rogue Company plays and how like fast and loose it is, it's just the best gun.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe there's a way to add a twist to that and make it work, but it's definitely a challenge. I mean, I'm sure we'll go and reevaluate that the
Mhm.
next time we're working on a sniper, or look at different ways to do it.
Mhm.
Um, but there are a lot of different sniper rifles that have been done in video games over the years, so
Yeah.
there's definitely room. But it's a tricky challenge because they're just such an extreme gun,
Yeah.
and they perform so uniquely. So like, it's probably unsurprising, but statistically, sniper rifles will do the least damage per round of any gun in the game.
Mhm.
But they're also one of potentially the most frustrating and potentially the most fearsome guns in the game. So, and ultimately, we think that like the LR-15 especially is in a pretty good state of balance.
Yeah.
So finding new stuff to hit in that same sort of balanced
Mhm.
area is pretty tricky.
Yeah, no, the full body definitely is exactly what I think of when I think of a sniper within Rogue Company. It's like it's got, the magazine size to be sort of useful in different situations. It's got the one tap head, it's got the body shot damage, which is really good. And it
Yeah.
performs kind of very traditionally like other snipers would. Then you've got the tier, which is I think very unique with that sort of fire rate, 2 tap to the body potential or the 1 tap to the head. And definitely identity crisis is a way of describing what that gun's been through. So yeah,
The tier is kind of like it's almost as close. My personal opinion is like as close as I would want to inch to like the one-shot body, like quick two, quick bang bang,
Yeah.
like to the body is in the same magazine without having to reload or stop. Is like okay, like that's pretty close to a one-shot body. And in the 3P game, like Kret was saying, it can be pretty tricky to pull off,
Yeah.
especially the way that ours plays.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I'm gonna throw a minor question at you here. Have you ever considered in the development cycle something along the line of like flinch with a sniper when you get shot to make that harder potentially with a rewarding 1 tap body? But I've because Rogue Company is a game without necessarily flinch mechanics, so I've always been curious about where the state of development went with flinch, whether you decided to or why you decided to take it out or anything like that.
We have tested it. Ultimately, we felt like it just made sniping harder for people who already weren't good at sniping.
So,
And the people who were good at sniping, it actually didn't matter.
okay.
Because we believe that, especially for like the really skilled snipers, oftentimes they're killing you before you even fire that shot.
Yeah.
Um, so, or at the very least, their shot is like tied with your shot simultaneously if they're really on that level, at which point Flinch isn't doing anything.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, definitely. And another question I kind of had, as we were talking about roles as well, kind of branching off that topic specifically, is how do you find roles and the designing of roles when you're thinking about all the different game modes that you have? And I'm going to kind of take LTMs out because I know they're very specific to different things, but taking your core modes like Strikeout, which is your respawn mode, Demolition, obviously, and then even throwing in like Wingman, like how does the design process and balance of the different roles and characters kind of impact depending on what game mode you're thinking of?
Yeah, I mean, some of those characters are present and in the game before King of the Hill existed or even
True.
Strikeout existed. Like, so it's tough in that regard, but obviously moving forward and having these additional core modes identified, it's something that we're always aware of. We're playing each of these new characters in each of these game modes. trying to see, is there any gaping holes? And I think there are some roles and some abilities that will just play better in like a demolition, in a round-based one life environment, and a little bit worse in something fast, respawn oriented like a King of the Hill. And that's okay, as long as there are other abilities that play really good in King of the Hill and maybe not as good in demolition. I think that push and pull is pretty interesting, and having different things that are different strengths in different modes is going to give you variety and challenge like how you think about putting your composition together and what you actually want to play in these various modes.
Right. And so one of the other factors, and for me, this is my North Star, is that everything has to work in every mode. Like it has to be fully functional and you have to be able to fully use it. So I guess this is a slight teaser. It's not going to give you anything, and it'll make sense in a couple months. We have an in-development character where we were working on a mechanic that stacks as you kill people.
Okay.
And we had a version of that where you need to like kill or eliminate a total of like 6 people, right?
Okay.
And then we're like, oh man, this is great. This is really compelling. Wait a second. It doesn't work in demolition.
No,
You can't kill 6 people in one round. Like it
happening.
just doesn't really work. So we had to reevaluate, take another look at it. And I'm excited to see what happens when that character comes out at some point. We'll see. It'll be interesting.
I don't know. It sounds like a duelist to me, kind of ability there potentially. I don't know. No, that's interesting to know, because I didn't know whether you guys specifically had in mind, you know what, we need a rogue who is specifically here for demolition, like, you know, especially and again, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, is you were talking about how in the first 20 or so you wanted to really flesh out the roster. You wanted to make sure there were options for different things, such as having Demon and Switchblade being very similar in their sort of roles but doing slightly different things. You know, how are you seeing the next 10 rogues, for example, develop with that? Like, are you looking to fill in gaps still in roles, or are you looking to add different kind of characters to fill the same roles?
I think we still do have like a list of things that we want to do in the game that we don't currently have, that aren't necessarily in response to a meta. So there is still some fun things that we want to do that are missing from the game. As far as like responding to a meta, I'll let Cret kind of take that, as he has a lot of experience doing that in his past.
Yeah, so that's something that we had to do a couple of times on Paladins. So not to go too deep, there's a point where Paladins is a hero shooter, and we knew that people playing tanks and healers and standing in a pile was pretty strong. And we sort of forecasted that, and we made a character that specifically, if you do that strategy, kind of just counters it by providing anti-heal, doing AoE damage. That is something that we will do over the course of the game as we deem necessary. It's pretty tricky because character development takes a long time.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of assume it's going to become a strategy, and then plan really far in advance to make that happen. We do think about those sorts of things, and so there may be some characters coming like that in the future, maybe not. It just sort of depends on what we view as a challenge there. As for filling out the roster, a lot of it is also just like different ways to experience the game. That's one of the awesome things about having these rogues, is that they can provide different skill expressions, different ways to do the game. One of my favorite characters to play is Vi, because one of the ways in which you can use that character is pure area denial, which is a skill that literally cannot be expressed by 80% of the roster, right? But with Vi, you can lay down tear gases and Molotovs and poison pools, and you can manipulate the battlefield in a way that is absolutely not possible on other characters. And so adding different characters that can allow players to express skills in new and exciting and unique ways is definitely a priority for us.
Okay. I like that, especially, but I guess with that and with additional characters comes the kind of difficulty of making sure characters don't overshadow other characters. Yeah. And I personally felt this with Switchblade when she came out. I know she's a bit being toned down now, which I think is going to help, but I felt like she kind of overshadowed Demo for a little bit. Like I would be in games and think, hey, I want some sort of heavy explosive breacher. Why would I pick Demo over Switchblade when Switchblade just feels so much stronger? And how do you deal with that challenge, especially moving forward, of finding rogues that can fulfill a very similar role without overshadowing another character?
So that comes down to, and it's tricky, understanding the specific nuance of the characters. So, in theory, both Dima and Switchblade are built to handle the situation of I have an enemy behind cover and I need to handle it. Switchblade should handle that by firing a rocket launcher at the cover and creating strong area denial that forces them out of that cover to reposition. Dima should, in theory, do a similar thing, although Dima uses a threat of lethality that, like, the explosions will just kill you and they explode simultaneously. Like, if you take that burst of damage, you're just dead.
Yeah.
Unless you have tenacity and you manage to be far enough away, right? But it does kill through tenacity if you hit all three. Whereas Switchblade is like this area denial that you have to get out of. But if your reaction speed is there, you'll probably be fine. So that nuance should be the deciding factor of how you want to handle that situation. And potentially, when we look at team comps, that nuance could be exploited by combinations of different characters, right? Like maybe there's a way that you could use tear gas in combination with Dima's launcher to say, well, you're just not going to be able to get out of this area in time, and you're just going to die. And that's a place where we're looking to add depth to the game and improve that play, where ultimately what I believe is that our players should be thinking about, like, okay, how can I'll use Demon Switchblade. How can I put Dima with another character that amplifies his strengths? How can I put Switchblade with another character that amplifies her strengths? What characters can counter those experiences? Dima, for example, depending on the situation, is much more resilient to APSs, whereas Switchblade's entire rocket could just get destroyed by that. So that's the nuance that we want, and it can be really tricky to land. We're still working through it, but hopefully with the adjustments, especially that post-fire time for Switchblade, there will be a little bit more reason to use Dima.
Yeah, actually, now that you've said that, because obviously I've seen the patch notes and I played it, and you know, I knew the weapon or the ability kind of needed a nerf, but now that you've said that and you've put it in perspective, it actually makes sense exactly why you did that nerf, because you are taking that lethality out of the ult, or at least the instant sort of I ult you and
it's
run
like
away.
the watching of, we want that area denial piece to come into play, and it's just keeping an ear to the streets, right? Watching your game, how are players actually using the tools that you're giving them? Is that vision that you had for an ability or a gun coming to fruition in that way, and seeing, a lot of the jump corner rockets just to get the quick 75 followed up with a melee or like a shot from any other gun in the game. Like, all right, that's a thing you should be able to do because the rocket does damage. People are going to want to shoot people with the rocket. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But we don't want that to be overwhelmingly like the best choice all of the time. So how do we like tone back that piece without hitting the rest of what you might be able to do with that ability, and then kind of letting that player creativity take back over and see where we land?
Right, because ultimately, one of the ways to think about it is like the checkmate situation, right? Where it's like, if I make this play, this other person is guaranteed to be dead. And both of those characters should theoretically checkmate an opponent when they are using their ability on them. The opponent's in cover, they are not shielded by APS, and they have friends there to shoot their guns and confirm the kill, right? I think they do both do that, but Switchblade also just has this, oh, you're standing by a corner? Well, that's a bad decision. Which, the other thing is that we have to account for is just sort of player expectations. And fundamentally, we can't make the rocket do 10 damage, right? Like, that would just be weird.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think, I said, that actually really helps like me as a player understand those changes a bit more, because I get why like you changed the switch time of the weapons from the rocket launcher, but like I said, okay, that kind of makes sense. But now it really makes sense. If that makes sense, I was glad I asked that question, because that enlightens it pretty well. I think
we try to do our best, and always let us know if we can do better of providing like that. Like, okay, this is what we're thinking. This is why we're doing this. Sort of little blurb in our patch notes to like give you guys a little bit of dev insight on why exactly, unless it's like a super obvious change of something like a damage number.
Yeah. On that note, actually, I do want to ask something, and it's just for the community, if they did want to give you guys feedback, what is the best way to give feedback? Is it via Twitter, via Reddit, via the surveys that you do? What would be the best way for the community to voice those sort of opinions to you guys? What's the easiest way?
I would probably defer to the community team to answer that, because they're the ones that are technically direct. Obviously, Scott and I and Kret all have Twitters, but that's not our main job. To collect that feedback. The community job does a great job, but collecting it really from all sources, right?
Yeah.
Be it Twitter, be it Reddit, be it Discord. They do some other things I can't remember the names of right now, but they collect all of that, sort of distill it down for us. And so these are the hot topics we got to hit. We have to address these things. This is what people are being frustrated by. So the answer is we have a team monitoring basically any avenue that you could possibly give feedback through to try and get all that answered and addressed.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend writing your message in a bottle and sending it out to sea. I don't know that they'll get it then, but pretty much every other avenue on the internet, our community team will find and relay to us, which is awesome. I will say that interacting with surveys is great because it's a different kind of feedback, right?
Yeah.
Like, so when we're looking at the state of the game, we look at a number of different things. We look at statistical balance. We look at what the community is saying. We look at what our really engaged high-level players are saying. We look at our surveys, and we all look at those in different ways, in different contexts, and it's the combination that tells us what to do. For example, Switchblade, statistically, like her win rate is really balanced, right? But when you look at like the specific feedback from the community and the high level players and the surveys, are like, okay, there is something wrong here. It's just not something that's statistically represented. And so we really do need everything. Like, give us all the feedback in all the ways.
Okay, no, I like that. I think that'll help a lot of people sort of understand the best ways to at least contact. And it's literally just however you can, just try and get information out there. And I know you guys got a good team to sift through all that and make sure it's all heard and stuff, which is great.
But be nice to them.
Exactly.
You always catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. I think everybody should take that to heart. It is a human behind that computer, that feedback that you're giving, right? And you just will have a better chance of being heard if you're constructive with your feedback.
And it also helps to be constructive in a way where you tell us why you think what you think, right? Like, a lot of people could say, hey, nerf Switchblade. A lot of people could say, hey, buff Dallas. But like, why do you think Dallas should be buffed? Even if we agree with you, it's really helpful to know what your perspective is, because it's going to be different from our perspective and probably most other people's. Also, just to reiterate, use the surveys. They're great. They help us in a really different way, just so we can get a very high level view that's sort of different from like who's tweeting the most about what they're tweeting about.
Yeah, no, okay. I think that'll be helpful for a lot of people to do. I like the respectful thing that you mentioned. I think that is true as well. Definitely be respectful. And I like that little quote you said with the honey. I like that. I never heard that one. That's good. But no, guys, I think that is pretty much going to come to the end of this conversation. I had one more question for each of you, which is just more of a personal thing. But I want to know from your perspective on your development team with these characters, who has been, let's say, your favorite, because you can't pick between your children, but one of the more interesting ones. Which one has really sort of like captivated you personally of a character that you've worked on or that you have within the game?
Oh man, I think I actually really like the VO and the music we did for Canon. I'm a very audio centric person, so I had a lot of fun. And it's just like a different thing. I had the most fun, and I really wanted the music, the theme music when you pull out the Gatling gun. That was something I was just like laying out for. I was like, audio team, I got it, please. I gotta have this. I'll help you I'll give you everything you need, any reference. So it was a fun, different kind of thing for me to do, and I enjoy that type of thing.
For me, it was definitely Kestrel. She was a super unique challenge. We knew the guiding pillar was she's like a retired Rogue Company character, right? So it's sort of narrative in a way. But she's also the most Rogue Company rogue there is. That was sort of what we were going for. It was a really interesting challenge to sort of think about what our game is, how it plays, and then create a character that sort of fits into it seamlessly, and takes advantage of, all the things we already know about the game. And also the time frame was super tight, so it was also a sort of a
get it right.
I remember the one.
Technical challenge. You got to get it right the first time. I'm also really excited for a couple of our upcoming characters. Not going to say anything about them, but they're going to be really cool.
That's good. I look forward to Cannon dropping on the 5th of October. That'll be really fun to get him in game and really get to play with him and test him out and see that all that vision come to fruition. So thank you guys for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully the community has heard some of this and learned a lot of stuff. I know I have. It's been really interesting. So thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Radthar.